Taking a bit of time preparing to live stream. Setting up our meeting for Facebook Live. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba and our sponsor, Love You by Shoppers Drug Mart, thank you for joining us tonight as we gather to listen to the 7th speaker in our Women's Speaker Series, Crushing the Stigma One Story at a Time. The Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba offices are located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. At this time, I would like to say a huge thank you to Shoppers Drug Mart, who make events like this possible. In Manitoba, we are their charity of choice, which means the proceeds from Run for Women go towards supporting our women's program at Mood Disorders. We could not do the work we do without their support. We love you, shoppers. Our Women's Speaker Series is a monthly online series aired on Facebook Live, the third Thursday of each month at 7 p.m. The Speaker Series was created to give those who identify as women in our community a platform to speak about their stories in the open and to feel empowered in doing so. Featuring a different speaker each month, the series kicked off on September 23rd and ends on May 19th, 2022. The series is based on our peer support model, meaning we empower those who suffer from mental illness to share their lived experiences and recovery stories of hope in a safe and supportive environment. We are very grateful to each speaker for sharing her story and providing hope for others who may be struggling. As a general disclaimer, the views, information, or opinions expressed during our Women's Speaker Series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba or its employees. The primary purpose of this speaker series is to empower women by crushing the stigma of mental health, one story at a time. This speaker series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Tonight, we welcome another amazing speaker, Marion Cooper. Marion is the Chief Executive Officer of CMHA for Manitoba and Winnipeg. Marion also served as the Executive Lead for Strategic Partnerships with CMHA National Office, supporting partnerships with Indigenous organizations and communities from January 2018 to 2020. She is a clinical social worker and mental health and addictions leader who has worked in the community sector in various positions since 1992. She was instrumental in establishing the mental health promotion and prevention team at the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority from 2003 till 2014. She is the past president of the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, and she currently serves as the Mental Health Promotion Expert Working Group for the International Union for Health Promotion and the Public Health Council leaders with the International Institute for Mental Health Leadership. Marion is passionate about recovery, social justice, system transformation, co-design, and innovation to advance mental health and well-being for the entire population. Marion has titled her talk tonight, How One Woman's Personal Recovery Experience Led to a Personal and Professional Vocation in Mental Health. Without further ado, here's Marion.
Thank you, Pam, for that. And it's really great to be here. And it's kind of a weird experience because I'm here looking at this camera and this screen, and I don't know who's out there. So I'm going to pretend that I'm talking to myself in the morning and reminding myself of all of the important experiences that I've had on my journey of life. And how it really informs everything that I do each day. And I look forward to having an opportunity to see some of you and to hear some of the questions that might come out as a result of this conversation. Want to thank the Mood Disorders for the opportunity to share my story and to be a part of this great event celebrating women and celebrating women's recovery and resilience and the power of that important journey of growing and evolving as women in our communities. It's a great initiative, and it's great that the Mood Disorders is leading this work and raising up these voices and the diverse voices that have come through so far. It's very inspiring. So thank you very much, Pam, and for the team at Mood Disorders Association. I'm excited to share my story. It's not something I get asked to do very often. And then I have to pause and think, well, what is my story? And actually, we all have a story. And sometimes it's these opportunities when we're asked to share that story that it invites us to go inward and to reflect on what that story is and the story that continues to evolve and to be told each day that I'm on this planet and connecting with those that I love in my community and doing the work that I feel called to do. So my story is just an ordinary story, and it's my story of my journey. And I really believe that when we share our stories, that there's good that comes from that experience for me, and strength that comes from that process of sharing my story that will benefit me. But I hope that my sharing inspires you to think about your story and to connect to your journey and the wisdom that has come along your path through the experiences of your life. So I would invite you to listen today, but also to think about and to listen to yourself as your own story emerges each moment as we continue on. So I'm going to share some thoughts, and I've prepared a little bit today for sharing my story. But I really wanted to start this evening by locating myself and where I come from. And it's one of the beautiful things that our Indigenous community reminds us of in terms of the importance of not just our land acknowledgement, but actually locating ourselves. Who are we? Where do we come from? So an important part of my story is where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in Labrador. And I would say my perspective was very much informed by my upbringing and by the community that I came from. So this evening, I want to share a little bit about my life experiences, my worldview, and my values, and how it really has informed my professional life and the work that I do in mental health. And I feel it's a real privilege to do this work and to support others in their journey. As I reflected and prepared this evening, several themes came up for me that really have emerged again and again for me in my life that are really fundamental to who I am. And these themes that I'm going to share about this evening include the importance of spirituality in my life and my fundamental values and beliefs. It's also about the journey of making meaning out of the challenges that I've encountered and the experiences that I've had, and how it's formed me and who I am becoming. And then the third theme is really the power of connection and peer support and being a part of a loving community that offers acceptance and support. So I think those are all themes that probably we all can connect to. And I'm happy to share some of these things that have happened for me along the way. So I'm the second youngest of a family that has 4 children. I was raised by my mom, Louise, and my father, Rayfield. And my childhood was, pretty ordinary, filled with lots of loving memories and great life experiences in a very modern mining town in Labrador that most people probably don't even know about. But, it was a special place, and I have really fond memories of growing up in the north and growing up in an isolated community and having to really be connected to a community and not ever having the luxury of leaving that community very, very often. So got to see wonderful things and how a community can really be the fabric of a vibrant life for people. So that was a really big part of my childhood, being a part of a community that had to be very self-sufficient and independent. And those have been qualities that I've really taken on in my life, and a part of who I am. You know, growing up, you know, life brings with it lots of struggles, and adolescence in particular is such a turbulent time. And, you know, I'm reminded every day of the integral sort of developmental milestones that go on during our adolescence. And I have a teenager now, so I get to see that in a different perspective. But my adolescence was, you know, like many others. I, you know, wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to have a peer group. I wanted to feel like other people, right? And that's really hard for a lot of teenagers, because it's a time when, you know, you're trying to figure out who you are, and you're trying to connect to a sense of purpose in your life and figure out what it is you want to do. And that was sometimes challenging for me, and it's challenging probably for most teenagers. But early in my teens, I, you know, was very fortunate that part of my seeking a sense of purpose and meaning was connected to discovering spirituality as a young adolescent. And an early mentor of mine, which was my grandmother. I didn't grow up going to church or being connected to, you know, a formal religion in my early childhood, but I had some exposure to that in my early adolescence through my grandmother, who would come to visit us, you know, in the winter, usually for a couple of weeks. And so I would kind of hang out with her, and I would see this very strong woman doing things that I hadn't really been exposed to, like praying and connecting to, you know, God as she understood God. And I became very, very curious about that, and started to kind of want to explore it. And I found myself in this very peculiar place where I was seeking out a connection to church. And the people that I was meeting at church were other kids who were being forced to go to church because their parents took them. And there I was wanting to be there. So that was a really interesting process for me, because it really started to fill what was a gap in my life, when I was trying to figure out who I am and where do I belong and what's my purpose. Connecting to spirituality became an important part of figuring out that process for myself. I'm very thankful for that. And I'm very thankful that I was able to do that in a way that was self-directed and not imposed upon. So it's one of the things that I believe is so important in recovery journeys and in our journey to become our authentic self, to listen to our heart and to pay attention to the things that, you know, we're curious about, and to explore them. And underneath that, there's lots of really interesting gifts. The process of connecting with a faith community was also something that, you know, gave me a sense of family that was different than my family of origin. And it allowed me to begin to develop myself in a really unique way that I think was very, very formative. One of the most key things around that journey for me was a community that was about service. And I wanted to belong, but I also wanted to be connected and help other people. So long before I had any aspirations to become a mental health service provider or a social worker, I found myself finding ways to be connected to a community that was trying to help others. and to fix problems and be there for others. Now, I didn't realize until lots of therapy afterwards that this probably was well suited to me as the responsible child, the parentified child, and being someone who took on more responsibilities than probably I was ready for as a young adolescent and teenager. But there I was, finding my way. Through those years, I struggled with many of the same things a lot of my peers did: body image, fitting in, feeling preoccupied with my weight, and developed an eating disorder. And I didn't call it an eating disorder. I just knew that I was trying to do things to manage my preoccupation with my weight that really became quite problematic and led to some really disordered eating. And that went on for years and years before I realized that that wasn't something that was sustainable and was really impacting my mental health. Also around that time, I was very aware that I had an older brother who was struggling with substance use disorder. And I became more and more aware that your mental health wasn't something you could take for granted, that these struggles around body image and disordered eating, and seeing my brother struggle with a substance use disorder, were probably the beginnings of me becoming more aware of mental health challenges. And these were times when there was no curriculum in schools around mental health. Mood disorders weren't in my community, and the Canadian Mental Health Association didn't exist in my community. There was no conversation about mental health and stigma. So, we had to find our way through that. And I was really thankful that even as a 15 and 16-year-old, the one thing that was in my community were 12-step community support groups. So there I was trying to be supportive to my brother, and discovered Alateen. And something like Alateen, which is a peer support group, became a really important part of me beginning to understand that there's an important journey towards recovery. And I didn't call it that at that time, but that it was an important part of what was going to help me to become a healthy young woman, and to find my way in my life, but also support my brother in his journey. What I realized very quickly was that I wasn't going to help my brother, but it was going to be helpful to me. And, and that was always a good reminder when I think back to that. But finding that connection with others who were going through a similar journey when I was struggling with an eating disorder, and wanting to be supportive and loving to my brother who was struggling, got me to a place where I very early on discovered peer support, long before I even discovered, my vocation as a social worker. I was always looking for the next opportunity, and couldn't wait to leave my community in Labrador and to go to the big city. And the big city for me was coming to Winnipeg. And when I was 17, I moved to Winnipeg and came here to go to university, and began to explore what it was that I wanted to do with my life. I was fortunate enough to pursue a social work as a career, and then had some very formative experiences as social work practicums that have been so, I think, tied to my professional and my personal identity over the years. I was lucky to do my very first social work placement in 1990 at the Indigenous Family Center on Selkirk Avenue, and then a second social work practicum at Sarah Riel here in Winnipeg. And those two experiences have been foundational to my values, my continued journey towards my own personal recovery and becoming an authentic self, and also to an understanding of how I think mental health supports need to be delivered in our communities that support healing and recovery for communities. I was very lucky to have mentors. So in addition to being so fortunate to experience peer support early on in my youth, I had great mentors that believed in me, reminded me of that there was something special for me to do. And, that mentorship that I think is so key to all of us feeling encouraged and inspired. When you have a mentor that has that kind of belief in you, what a difference it makes. And it really, really helped me to believe in myself and to take risks and to try things that maybe I wouldn't have tried. My experience at the Indigenous Family Center was so powerful, and those were early days around learning about Indigenous culture and the impacts of residential school. And this was during a time when the work around truth and reconciliation was not even a part of our conversation. But I was so fortunate to see community come together and sharing circles of women coming together to share their journey of trying to be there for their families and learn skills to support their community. And that really inspired me and reminded me that so much of what needs to happen in our communities is bringing people together around a circle and creating space for people to share with one another, and that really fosters so much healing for everyone. That experience served me well when I went to Sarah Riel, which seemed like just such a natural place for me to go and to continue to develop my skills as a social worker and to develop my identity as someone in the helping profession. It also became a place where I was able to be mentored by many strong women who were gray nuns, who were supporting work in service of their vocation. And it was probably at that time that I realized that this work that I was finding myself doing in mental health was in fact a vocation. And it wasn't about a job. It wasn't about being a social worker and being a professional. It was actually about doing something that really brought deep meaning to me and connected me to something that I could relate to in terms of the journey of recovery and the struggles that many of us face along the way, but that the power of creating environments that foster opportunity to develop skills and develop both internal and external resources to live a life that's meaningful and hopeful, could happen. And I not only experienced that myself, but I was able to support others to experience that in the different roles that I had at Sarah Riel over the years that I was there. And it was just a wonderful way to start my work in the mental health sector. By then I'm in my 20s, and here I was, this young social worker, a woman who was trying to figure out what it meant to be in this profession, connecting my personal lived experience with my professional life and connecting to a broader community. I would say that those years of working at Sarah Riel and then moving into other community-based organizations after that just continued to strengthen my identity as my personal, the personal is political, right? The personal connection to this important work in mental health was what connected me to becoming an advocate, that connected me to becoming someone who believed that mental health services needed to continue to evolve and be more than just about symptom management and managing your illness, that it was about learning how to thrive and find your place in the world and to challenge the status quo, including parts of our mental health system that can in fact be and have historically been very limiting for people. And so that advocacy and the opportunity to be a part of the women's community here in Winnipeg and to be really connected to an empowerment movement during those years in the 90s during many different phases of health transformation. It gave me great insight as to what it really takes to get a system to mobilize and change and become relevant for people and for communities. And I've seen so much change and growth over the years, but there's still work to do. But being a part of, Winnipeg during those years, as the women's community evolved, as the mental health system evolved, and as LGBTQ issues became, I think, so much more mainstream, and it became safer to be part of a diverse community and proud. And I've seen my own personal identity evolve through that process as well, and saw so much transformation in our communities where people who struggled with lots of shame and fear of not wanting to tell others about who they really are, to communities celebrating and our commitment to social justice and inclusion growing and growing. And I've just seen Winnipeg just kind of transform, and it was so beautiful to be a part of that during my 20s and 30s, working in mental health and being a woman trying to find herself and finding my way through my life journey and my identity as a woman. I just want to share a little bit about where that kind of eventually landed me, through the years. I was so fortunate to find myself in opportunities where I got to give back in so many different ways to the communities that I was a part of, and to also have different opportunities in my career. I was able to see small organizations make huge differences, and the community mental health sector in Manitoba grow. And but then also see investments in services that I think try to bring about more parity and more access to services. So that lended me to opportunities with the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority that then landed me in the most exciting part of my personal and professional career, where I discovered this whole field of mental health promotion. I had an opportunity to take a role with the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority in around 2003, 2004, where I began to learn that mental health was more than the absence of mental illness or mental health struggle, that it was something positive, and it was something to be developed and to be supported as an asset for living and thriving. And this really unleashed in me this even deeper passion at a personal and professional level, that I saw so much possibility for transforming the mental health system from being a system that was focused on mental illness to being one that really would focus on mental health and helping communities thrive and focus on psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, and cultural well-being, which is different than focusing only on illness and diagnosis and treatment. And of course, those things are incredibly important, but it became kind of this full picture for me that I think has just moved both my personal connection to what I need to be mentally healthy in my life, to also the things that I try and advocate for, that we try and build within our mental health and community care systems that help our communities to thrive. That whole field brought me a whole host of new inspirational mentors and individuals that have really, I think, encouraged me to push the boundaries around expecting more from a mental health system than what would have been the case 20 years ago. One of those mentors was Corey Keyes, and he's a real thought leader in mental health who really coined the idea of flourishing and was a real pioneer in positive psychology. And that just was just so integral to sort of this next chapter in my career and in my personal life. That led me to doing really interesting work and the work always had a personal lesson, and I had more struggle ahead, as I continued on in this career. One of the really interesting things I got to do when I started to do work in public health and mental health promotion, little did I know that all of this was in store for me, but I had the opportunity to lead a postpartum depression project. And this was just around the time I was pregnant with my son. And I remember, being fully immersed in trying to educate public health nurses and support the health authority to build capacity, to recognize and respond to postpartum distress and postpartum depression. And then I went on mat leave. And then I was hit by postpartum anxiety. But of course, I didn't even recognize it in myself. And that's often the irony, that we do this work and we get so embedded in the work, and it's something that's outside of us, that even when we're experiencing it, when I was experiencing distress and anxiety during those first few months, that first year, I didn't even see it in myself. And so when we're talking about crushing the stigma, it's, we think we've come a long way, and we have absolutely come a long way in terms of mental health being a conversation topic in a way that it wasn't 20 or 30 years ago. But there's still stigma, and probably now it's the self-stigma, and it's not me. This isn't me, but it was me. And there I was struggling to even recognize it in myself. But the gift, of course, was that more supports were available. And thankfully, I was able to connect with another peer support circle that allowed me to connect with other women who were having similar struggles. And I did it through, breastfeeding support groups and connecting with other women struggling. And it reminded me of again, the importance of peer support and discovering that in unexpected ways. And, how beautiful and how low barrier that really is to being able to get the support you need. So I was so thankful for that, and was able to then, begin to heal and to get to a place where I was able to be more connected to being a mom and less anxious. But it did really affect my parenting style, I will say. And just as I was starting to feel better, we never know what life's going to throw us. And I was, a year out from being a new mom. My baby was a year old. My partner and I were head over heels for him, and trying to find the balance of being parents and working. And then I was diagnosed with kidney cancer, and definitely not the experience anybody is expecting, and an unwelcome surprise. And once again, reminded of how fragile our psyche is, and how connected our body, mind, and spirits are. Having a physical health crisis like that, and then the impact it has on our mental health, my mental health, and my connection to my time on the planet, the fear that comes with that kind of health crisis. And of course, I recovered physically very quickly, but it took me years to recover emotionally and psychologically from that experience. And I sought help in so many different ways. And again, to my surprise, the thing that made all the difference was connecting with other peers who had had a similar journey. And I was so fortunate to connect again with other kidney cancer patients who were willing to share their journey and what they had been through, their strength, what gave them hope, and what was making a difference. And that really was just God sent for me, that it allowed me to reconnect to my purpose, to reconnect to my well-being, and to begin to make meaning out of that experience. in a way that I hadn't anticipated. Making meaning out of it in a way that allowed me to really say, this was a significant crisis, but I knew I wanted more moments. I wanted more moments with the people that I loved, and I knew that that's what it was all about. It was about the moments of connection, and with your community, with my family, and wanting to thrive in my life and to live my best life. And so that would then informed many, many years ahead. And, the kind of person I've continued to evolve into, and the kinds of things that have allowed me to take risks, make difficult choices, and continue to grow as a person, and to not be stuck and to not languish, but to find my way through those challenges, to find connection with others, and to be able to offer support and connection to others in their journey, but also to practice what I preach every day in the work that we do in mental health, supporting others, but to actually practice those same things in my day-to-day life, so that I can live authentically and be connected to this work in a deeply meaningful way. And it has certainly done that. It has allowed me to find such great meaning out of my work. And frankly, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like my life's purpose. And every day I get to connect with, people who call my organization, who are looking for supports, other parents, people who are struggling, other professionals who are trying to remain hopeful, because this work can have its wear and tear on us, and we need to be reminded of why we're doing it. So being able to support my colleagues and to also support other organizations together as we try and continue to make the world a better place for people who are needing supports and resources, and that we are there, and that we are continuing to advocate and ensure that the public continues to demand good mental health and access to resources that will support that. And, I would say that, again, many of my colleagues, when I sit and chat with them, what the staying power in this work is when you connect with that meaning at a very personal level. And that's the thing that keeps many of us going in the work that we do. And that we all are really about creating community. And for me, creating community is about creating that space for sharing our stories. And this has been such a great process for being able to share my story. And I'm going to close with just a beautiful quote from Melanie Gooselui. And it really, I think, speaks to why I said yes to this invitation, and why I would invite all of those of you who are listening to think about your story. Everyone has a story to tell, a lesson to teach, and wisdom to share. Life is a beautiful masterpiece bound together by your experiences. Open up and share your story. Become an inspiration to others. You can make a difference because you matter. You were created with purpose. Live your life with intention. Go out there and make a difference by being the difference. And for me, that's really what this work is about, trying to make a difference, trying to learn from the experiences that I've had along the way, to not forget about those experiences, to not take life for granted, to not take those that I love for granted, those that I get to work with every day for granted, and to listen to the stories that all of you have, and to those that are part of my journey, to learn from that wisdom that they share with me, and to take risks and to share my story. And that's what I've done tonight. So I hope all of you can take some risks too. Thanks for listening.
Marion, thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight. Very, very touched by your story. I think you touched on so many key topics. Disordered eating is huge. We deal with many, many individuals in our office here who are struggling with body image and disordered eating. So much so that we put together programming around that, and even programming for youth, which is really where it all begins. And Dana, my colleague, will probably speak to that a little later. But I really just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story with us and inspiring us to really dig deep. You're talking about peer support, and that vocation. It's more than a job. It's a calling. It's that vocation. I can identify with that as well. I feel that same way. Doesn't feel like work. It feels like, life's purpose, wellspring. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dana to see if we have any questions from our audience. So Dana, over to you.
Awesome. Sorry. Is my sound okay? I know it's a little bit sensitive, but I'll try not to speak too loud. Hopefully this is okay. But hi everyone. Good evening. Thanks Marion for sharing your story. I also felt engaged too, I still identify as a youth as well, so it's always nice to hear what people's experiences are going through the mental health aspect and in the promotion field, as you called it. So I do have someone who wanted to share, and actually, I know her too, Olya, from Ray, actually. So it's lovely to. So hi, Olya. So her question was, she had a comment saying, "Good evening, Marion. Thank you for sharing your story. Your journey sounds fascinating. I understand when you talk about living a meaningful life when your personal and professional are so interwoven. So the question is, what does quote-unquote life/work balance look like for you when you find so much joy and passion in the work that you do?"
That's a great question. And as soon as I hear that question, I think of one of my dear colleagues, Lori McPherson, who did a lot of work around education and work-life balance. And often we'll talk about having many balls, like you're juggling. It's a juggling act, right? Like, oh, I'm trying to balance my work, my life, my parenting, my volunteer work, the whole list of things that we're all trying to balance. And I'm a terrible juggler. Those balls all fall down when I'm trying to do it that way. And so I've tried to approach my life not in these compartmentalized ways of this is my work life, this is my professional life, this is my personal life, this is my life as a volunteer. For me, it's really about all of the different parts of my life and finding harmony. And sometimes my work life will take up more space, and I'm okay with that because there are different times and different seasons of my life where my personal life needs to take up a different kind of space. And so I just need to listen to that inner voice and be guided by what are the priorities and how to find my way through that. So I tend not to be boundaried in the way that maybe some of my other colleagues have found very helpful. Where the idea of protecting my personal time and self-care is not something you'll hear me talk about, because I try to integrate strategies around well-being in my everyday, and I try to find that rhythm as opposed to the juggling act or the compartmentalizing. And I'm very lucky because I have a partner who is very oriented in the same way to life being very much about this rhythm of purpose and meaning and connecting to the things that you love, and work needs to be a part of that. I've always been very committed to not doing a job that I don't love. And in fact, I don't even think of my work as a job. And I've been very fortunate. I've never experienced a job as a job. I always have had the opportunity to do work that is deeply meaningful. And I put my everything into it. And I try to live with that kind of depth in my personal life and my professional life. Now I struggle like everybody else. And sometimes I need to ask for help to find my way to, strike focus in a different way from time to time. But paying attention to those rhythms is really how I approach it.
I like that. Thank you for the response. It's like very well thought out. So yeah, that's interesting because for me, I think I always need boundaries in work life. Maybe that's just how I see it, but it's interesting to hear a perspective where for you it's like no boundaries. So I kind of like that. It's kind of something I'll sit with when I finish this as I, you know, yeah, get off from the I guess not it doesn't feel like a job either to me. It always feels like continuous, especially for mental health. Um, I'm just also gonna talk a little bit if people don't want to send any questions, or if they do, as I start talking. A couple of people were just kind of commenting and saying, "Thank you for the wonderful story. Thank you for sharing." And there's someone named Rachel saying, "Thank you so much, Marion. Your vulnerability and sharing is inspirational. Thank you also for the reminders to share our stories and that we have purpose." Karen said, "Our jobs are not jobs, they're our work." I like that. I had a question actually, if no one wants to go, as I'm just patiently waiting. As a leader and being in the position you are, I could see that there's maybe expectations or maybe stress. I don't know. Again, it's like something that I'm curious about on the topic of vulnerability. So I wasn't sure if you, in your moment, in terms of leadership, maybe in your current line of work of what you're doing or in previous settings, have you had to be vulnerable, especially in a leadership position?
Yeah, I have been vulnerable, and I I would say that um, it's important to be just authentic. And when I've had life changes or struggles or health crises, I've shared that. I also make sure that I am able to tap into resources and supports when I need to, so that I'm able to share it in a way that doesn't get in the way of me being effective in the work that I'm committed to doing. But I have been vulnerable, and I would say that it's an important part of the evolving workplace, because as workplaces continue to evolve, we want to invite people to be their authentic selves, and that of course means at times being vulnerable. And so creating space for people to do that and encouraging people to tap into resources to support them as they continue to find their struggles and need to support themselves in ways to continue to develop and be to be well. We want to encourage those things. So I think again it's about creating communities and creating safety and creating conversations that allow people to ask questions when they're unsure, and to be able to know where they can go for the resources that they may need. And I don't think in leadership it's different. I think sometimes our various roles in the work that we might be doing will require us to do different kinds of tasks, and we might have to have certain expectations or communicate in particular ways. But again, trying to remember that we're all trying to do our very best and to do the best work that we can do, and to I think everybody tries to show up, and so how do we support each other to do that well? And again, it's taking the principles of positive psychology, framing things and approaching things in a positive way. It can be far more effective than being critical, right? And those are always reminders, because it's easy to be the critic, and sometimes you have to stop and shift gears and remember that how we move forward together is by being strength-based. And those are important principles for the work we do in mental health and the work we do in supporting communities to heal and thrive.
Thank you so much for the question. For me, that question kind of came from because I'm reading Brene Brown. So I kind of want to ask that since I've been really curious about how leadership and vulnerability, compassion, community, especially empathy, kind of play into the workplace. So it's really nice to kind of hear that it's much needed and always will be, and that workplace culture is always going to shift. It's never stagnant. So thank you for the answer. I know Pam wanted to ask a question, so I'll let Pam go ahead.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, I had a question for you, Marion. You've had such a long and illustrious career in mental health and worked in various roles. What advice would you have for somebody who is thinking about entering the mental health field? Would you any tips or advice or where they should start or what they should focus on first?
Well, one of the things I'm very happy I had the experience of doing is I've worked in many different places, and I've worked. I've never allowed my guiding sort of focus to be on how much money am I making, right? I've always wanted to do work that I was excited to do. So I made a commitment to myself. I wasn't going to be miserable in a job ever. And like I said earlier, I've been very lucky. I've loved every job, every opportunity I've had, but I've always created opportunities to try new things. So I would say, if you're early in your career, be open to trying new things, explore, work in different places, experience different organizations, take risks, be a leader, and don't wait for the title to be a leader. We're all leaders. And I remember my first job at Sarah Riel, my first social work position as a case manager there. I was so fortunate to have a great group of colleagues that I worked with, many of whom still work in mental health here in Winnipeg, who are great colleagues and great leaders. And we were all leaders in our entry positions, and we all showed up in a leadership way. And that created such great opportunity to learn and to grow and to take risks. And even as a young person, I remember thinking, oh, I'm only 23. I can't really tell anybody how old I am. They won't take me seriously. But I kept showing up. So keep showing up and just take risks, and don't be afraid to try something new, and keep asking questions and being curious.
Thanks, Marion. That was really great advice. I think many people will take that to heart. Anna, any more questions for Marion?
I would say not, just because I think more so people are commenting, appreciating, sharing. I think it's also very nerve-wracking. So if anybody wants to ask a question and the live stream ends after, again, like, no pressure. If you do want to pass on any questions to Marion, definitely DM us or message us on Facebook. We'll kind of get it to her and get that answered. Just because I know it's kind of a live session, and imagine being in person. I know people might get a little scared to ask questions, but I always think if you ask a question, probably 5 other people have the same question, and I think that's always just to encourage others. I guess I have a question too, again, just basing off of what I heard about your story, especially in just you being in like social work field, because I feel like a lot of people think that the only way to go is through doing a psych degree. And for me, I actually realized, learning from you and actually from others, that it's not the only way. So I'm just curious, for any students especially that are kind of lost, even though they're like, I want to be a psychologist, and then they realize that they don't like it because placements and stuff. So I was curious if you had any advice for students who are kind of like lost or don't know where they're going, even though they do want to have a field in mental health, for example.
Yeah, it's tricky sometimes to know what discipline, right, to pursue. And, you know, I think there are many different pathways and there's no one right way. And I would say if you are doing something and you don't like it, pay attention to that. Don't just stick it out if you don't like it. So trying to connect to the things that bring you connection to your values, to your gifts, and to continue to develop yourself. You know, I have had opportunity to work with fantastic social workers, nurses, psychiatrists, peer support workers, educators. We have a very interdisciplinary staff here at the Canadian Mental Health Association. And, you know, they all have different backgrounds. So, you know, you'd be surprised at the kinds of experiences that prepare you to work in the field. And don't underestimate your asset and your lived experience. Your personal experience is an asset. And of course, developing skills and professional training are all important if you want to pursue a particular discipline or type of work within the mental health sector. But that asset of your own lived experience and then being able to develop those skills to be in a place where you can then find what your particular gifts are. So I think the mental health field is actually broadening. I think with the virtual platform, we need people who understand how to deliver mental health and use technology in creative, innovative ways. So maybe it isn't a psychologist, maybe it's an instructional designer who's developing educational content for online mental health courses. Maybe that's a pathway that you hadn't even considered. Maybe it's the field of marriage and family therapy, or maybe it's a field of, you know, occupational therapy. You know, part of our important work to do in mental health is to ensure that we're developing supports and services that help people to reconnect to their life roles. So, you know, being effective as a mental health promoter in the education system, in the post-secondary setting. So you might be a prof at a university and you're teaching a course on whatever, you know, field of focus you've chosen. But the most important work you might be doing is supporting those students who are taking courses from you to find their way through their mental health struggles. So we all have a role to play in terms of promoting and supporting people around mental health, regardless of what your career is. You could be a transit driver with the city of Winnipeg and be a mental health promoter. So this is not just the work of the people who work in the sector. This is the work of our community.
Well said, Marion. That was extremely well said. I could honestly listen to you speak for hours. You have so many words of wisdom to share. I'm very, very honored to be with you here tonight. Dana, do we have any more questions?
We are good to go, so I just want to be conscious of time. But again, just a reminder, if people want to ask questions and then you think you missed your chance, just message us. We're always open. So if you want to leave questions after this and you thought about it, please do. And we can try and get it to Marion and have it answered. So, but yeah, I would say we're good for questions. We'll close the Q&A. And then Pam, if you want to have any final thoughts, or Marion, we'll wrap up.
Perfect. Thank you. Marion, did you have anything you wanted to say to close out?
No, I just want to thank you, Pam and Dana, for your support this evening. And what a beautiful opportunity this has been. So thank you.
Oh, we're very lucky to have had you here with us tonight. Thank you, Marion. I'm just going to say a few closing remarks. If anybody has been triggered by Marion's story and feels like they need support, please call our peer support line at 204-560-1461 or toll free 1-800-263-1460. And on behalf of everyone here at Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba, I just want to thank everybody who has tuned in tonight. We hope that you'll join us for our next and final speaker in May. It's our very own Rita Chahal, our Executive Director. The date is still a little bit decided yet, so we will let you all know when that date will be. Thank you all and have a great night.